Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Klingspor's Tech Talk. I'm Nick.
And I'm Jessica.
And we've got something exciting to talk to you about today. It's an issue that many people have when it comes to coated abrasives, in fact, bonded abrasives as well. And that is the subject of loading. Now, if you're not sure what loading is, well, Jessica's going to tell you all about it.
So loading, basically, as you're sanding any kind of soft or gummy material, what it does is basically pack in between the peaks of those grains and cover that grain, so that it makes the abrasive not last as long.
So basically what we're looking at, filling in between the peaks of those abrasive grains. And then once that's done and it's just completely leveled out, those peaks don't stick up at all.
Yep.
So it's not going to do anything. And you know, we've got several different kind of materials that concern us as far as loading is concerned. What kind of materials are we looking at?
So like I said, your softer materials, so wood like pine or cedar. And then you've got your metal, so like aluminum, as it heats up, it's going to soften and tend to load.
Yeah. And there are various things we can do to combat this, and that's kind of what we want to go into today. One of the things that we talk about a lot when it comes to a loading is our grain coverage. Now, when we talk about grain coverage, what that means is we have what's called an open coat, a semi-open coat, and a closed coat. An open coat is 50% abrasive grain coverage on the backing. The semi-open coat is 70% grain coverage on the backing, and the closed coat is 100% grain coverage on the backing. What are the advantages of these? Yeah,
so your closed coat is going to be, like he said, 100% grain coverage, and basically what that's going to do is load quicker. So all those, the bottoms of those grains are almost touching. There's not any space in between there, so all of that material is just going to kind of pack in there and load. So something to help with that is an open coat, which, like you said, 50% grain coverage, and it creates these spaces in between the grain that basically what happens as it starts to pack in and you're using that abrasive, it starts to flake out, so it's not going to load. And then you've got the semi-open, which is 70% grain coverage, and that's kind of a middle of the road. It's going to be more grain coverage to help, you know, just have more grains to remove the material, but you've also got the spaces in between the grain to help kind of flake out and not load.
And we do want to say too that if you can at all use a closed coat abrasive, it's going to give you a finer scratch pattern, a more even scratch pattern, so use it. But only in the times when you have the loading taking place or capacity to be able to take place, we want you to use a semi-open coat or an open coat to combat that loading. And then we do have some other tools at our disposal that we use to combat loading, and one of them is a Stearate. If you've never heard of a Stearate before, basically what a Stearate is, it's kind of a, I guess you could say, a soapy substance that's added as a top coat to the abrasives. And what that Stearate does, what its job is to completely combat that loading. We talked about the abrasive grains gathering up the loading that's taking place and then possibly flaking off or falling off when it gains mass and weight. The Stearate on top of this material is there so it can flake off easier and let that loading just drop away from the sanding process. Tell us a little bit maybe about some of the materials that we have available with that.
Yeah, so our 73 material is a top coat of Stearate like you talked about. One thing you'll notice with the 73 and even our 35, 27 and 36 all have a top coat of Stearate. You're going to notice almost like a zebra pattern, and that's indicating that top coat of Stearate. And like he said, as that wears down, it takes the loading with it. Now another material we have has a Stearate, but it doesn't have that zebra pattern. Our 33. Do you want to talk a little bit about the 33?
PS 33 is actually Klingspor's #1 selling product, interestingly enough. And I think part of the reason for that is that it's a proprietary system that Klingspor set up with the Stearate involved. But unlike most of our products that have a top coat of Stearate, this Stearate is incorporated right into the size coat of the resin that holds those abrasive grains in place. To explain that just a little bit, when a coated abrasive is made, it's a backing, and then a coat of resin is put on that backing. Abrasive grains are stuck to that light coat of resin, and then the size coat locks those abrasive grains in place so they don't shear off or fall off in the sanding process. So what we've done is we've incorporated the Stearate into that size coat. What this does is with like the PS73 and things like this, it slowly wears that Stearate off there. And then once the Stearate's gone, the loading has the opportunity to come back and take place. With a PS33, that Stearate incorporated into the size coat is going to stay active the entire time that coated abrasive has any life left. Yeah. Once the abrasive grains are completely worn down, well, of course, by that time the Stearate will no longer be necessary. Chances are there's still going to be even a little bit left at that point.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's a good product. I've used it for years myself.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. So another thing we'll talk about is a Multibond lubricant. So we know Multibond lubricant helps with heat. It keeps that heat down by 20%. So it's really great for your metalworking industry, but something else that does, if you're sanding like aluminum, that, like I said, tends to heat up and soften, that's going to load. So in turn, that Multibond lubricant is going to help with the loading in that aspect. Anything you want to add to Multibond lubricant?
No, I mean, you've covered it fairly well. And it's, like you said, it concerns mainly the softer metals, the non-ferrous metals.
You're not going to see it a lot in the woodworking.
Exactly. Yeah. And basically what happens is heat gets generated in the sanding process. Those softer metals soften up even further, and that's what causes the loading. So if we can control that heat, we've got it going on.
Absolutely. So talking about ACT, which is our advanced coating technology. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. Advanced coating technology is another proprietary Klingspor, you want to say top coat, but at the same time it's a coating process. Because it's not just a top coat. Basically what happens is if you have, let's say you have 2 abrasive grains, the size coat will for the most part, fill in the space between those abrasive grains. And of course that limits the aggressiveness of the material or anything like that. But when we incorporate the ACT banks the size coat or the coating down to the sides of the abrasive grains and leaves a lot more airspace in between there.
So it makes it almost like an open coat.
Exactly, yeah. And so that gives us several advantages. I mean, it loads less, it generates less heat, we get more aggressiveness, we get a longer life, all because of that ACT.
Absolutely. So a little bit about another thing, anti-static. You're going to need it more so in the woodworking industry. So when we say anti-static, some people are like, what is anti-static? Basically what it says, so you think about static electricity. If you rub a balloon on your hair and all of that hair creates a static electricity and it sticks to the balloon. So it's similar in woodworking with abrasives. You're sanding and it's creating that static electricity, and what it's doing is essentially pulling that material up and loading it onto the abrasive. There are 2 different types of anti-static. We've got our anti-static and our super anti-static. Tell us a little bit about the difference between the anti-static and super anti-static.
Basically what it boils down to is this. The anti-static coating is coated on the back of the material. So on the material where there's no abrasives, it's just backing. The super anti-static is coated on the front of the material. The reason that's done that way is we have the capacity for that material to be able to load either on the front or on the back because of the static electricity. If it draws to the backing of the material, it can load on the back of the belt or on the contact rollers of the machine. And of course, we already know if it's drawn to the front of the belt, it can load and cause those abrasive grains to become totally useless.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing. Another thing we also like to take note of when we talk about anti-static is we need to make sure that our sanding machines are grounded. What that means is you take a 6 to 8 foot rod, you drive it down into the ground, and then you run a cable from that rod up to the bed of the sanding machine. This actually really helps in the sanding process as well as far as eliminating that static electricity.
Yeah. This is one thing that I know I didn't realize, we talked some about, using the wrong grit. So explain a little bit about that. If we use the wrong grit, like let's say we're trying to do more removal with a finer grit, what is that essentially going to do?
There are prescribed amounts that you're supposed to remove with each individual grit. If you go over and above that, what it does, you have to put more pressure to remove the same amount of material, and it creates a lot of heat. And because that heat's being created, we have the natural oils and resins, especially in wood, that activates those oils and resins and causes them to start loading on the abrasive. And so, you know, using the wrong grit is a big thing. Another one is too fast a feed speed on the sander. You know, you can be using the right grit, you can have it set to the exact amount of material you need to remove, and that would be the proper amount. But if your feed speed is too fast, you end up in the same problem.
So it's essentially kind of doing the same thing as the wrong grit.
Yeah,
it's kind
exactly.
of just removing it too quickly.
Yep, you've got too much heat being built up, and that in turn causes the loading and all kinds of issues. And of course, we want to avoid all those.
Absolutely.
So one thing I want to mention real quick, again, if you have any questions, contact us at techtalk@klingspor.com, and we will get to your questions. We'll answer them here on one of our shows, or we might email you back, or whatever the case may be, but we will answer your questions.